It's another week, another set of bad actors, malicious files, and compromised systems. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the cutting-edge intel being shared by our awesome community in LimaCharlie, and a huge thank you to all those folks that take the time to share their knowledge with the rest of us. If you enjoy listening in on these intel chats and aren't in our community forum yet, then you should join the conversation. There is often much more information than we can get through on the show being shared there, and you will get it in real time. You can join us at community.limacharlie.io. And as always, I'm joined by the one and only Matt Bromley. How are you doing today, Matt? And where are you coming from?
Hey, Chris, doing well. I am actually coming to you live from Denver, Colorado. For any of the Coloradians or Colorado people, however you say that, who might be our listeners. I am currently out here at the SANS AI Summit, actually, and there's been some awesome content, awesome talks, all sorts of great things happening, but stepped away for a few minutes to have this chat with you. But I am live from Denver. Think I'll be back home next week, I think, but we'll see.
All right. Well, we'll wait and see what happens.
Fingers crossed I am.
Okay, let's jump right into it. Unit 42 researchers analyzed a new variation of domain generation algorithms referred to as typo DGAs that rely on generating domains using typographical errors of legitimate domain names. Traditional DGAs create randomized or algorithmically generated domain names, but this variation uses common keyboard-based typos such as character swaps, insertions, deletions, or replacements. The intent behind typo DGAs is to create domains that appear more legitimate and are therefore less likely to be flagged as malicious. This technique is being used by multiple malware families as part of their infrastructure. The analysis was conducted using DNS telemetry collected between January and September 2023. Over this period, Unit 42 identified 458,000 suspicious domains that matched patterns typically associated with typo DGAs. Of those, about 8,000 domains were observed serving malicious content. 13 malware families were connected to these typo DGA domains, including Remcos, Darkgate, Nispadu, and Xtrat. The researchers noted that this approach allows attackers to exploit user familiarity with common domains while making detections more difficult for traditional security systems. So I guess any kind of automated detection should catch these based on like Levenstein string distance, but it's like users scanning through the logs, I'm guessing, is where these things will get missed.
Yeah, I think it's a little combination of both. There's definitely an element to this that feels a lot like trying to defeat human eyes, right? I think, as you mentioned, trying to get past like what humans are used to seeing and things like that. But the other side of it, Chris, is that we're dealing with so many different domains here. I mean, when you're measuring these sorts of algorithms and these types of adversarial capabilities, and you're talking about domains in the thousands of domains, sometimes it's also just straight up, let's turn it into a game of whack-a-mole, right? Honestly, like some of the older pieces of malware, like Conficker and stuff, come to mind, who had kind of DGAs built in, and it yielded this like incredibly difficult detection opportunity because you never knew which C2 it was going to reach out to, which one it was going to talk to. And I feel like in cases like this, that there's a multifaceted or multi-headed approach of like, why develop this thing? Because the moment they shut down one, there's another 10, right? Mm-hmm. Shut down 10, there's another 100. Shut down 100, there's another 1,000. And it's just an interesting insight, I think. Furthermore, the number of malware families associated with this led me to believe it might not be necessarily like one threat actor, but maybe like some sort of a hosted infrastructure or something like that, where anyone with malicious intentions could jump in and say, hey, I want to like take advantage or buy a piece of that. Chris, we've talked about like ransomware as a service and multiple business models before. I'm not sure if DGAing is one of them, but you never know. It could be.
Yeah. Pay per post.
Maybe you can buy a block of them and then your malware gets configured to that C2 or something. I don't know. Maybe we just invented a business model we shouldn't have invented, but nonetheless, it's possible.
All right. So to detect typo DGA domains, Unit 42 used a combination of machine learning and graph-based clustering techniques. The ML model considered attributes like domain entropy, length, and structure, while the clustering component grouped domains based on lexical similarity and resolution behavior. This two-pronged approach allowed researchers to uncover over 200 distinct malicious campaigns leveraging typo DGAs. These campaigns use typo-generated domains to host payloads, redirect traffic, or serve as command and control endpoints. The findings indicate that typo DGAs provide a more evasive method for malware communication and infrastructure management. Domains generated through this technique are harder to distinguish from legitimate sites, which reduces the chances of being blocked by static detection mechanisms. Some of the identified malicious domains remain active for several months, suggesting low detection rates and successful evasion. The report concludes by recommending improved detection strategies and highlighting the need for defenders to adapt to this evolving tactic. So traditionally, the generated domains were more like hash looking. Is that, and these ones are meant to look more like legitimate domains.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the earlier like DGA wins. It was just like nonsensical looking stuff. Whereas I think, as you mentioned, these are geared more towards the human eyes side of it. Like, oh, if I'm scanning through logs or I'm looking through, frequency counts or things like that, I'm not going to detect it as easily, perhaps. Even, Unit 42 even mentioned that it took quite a bit of technical feat on their side. Combination of machine learning, graph clustering. They even go through and talk about, Chris, you mentioned this too, but going through and keeping an idea on like domain entropy, length, and structure. I mean, these are things we're not doing by hand, right? So it definitely took a little bit of advanced work to get there. So I do feel like there's a little bit of like, hey, look at this cool thing we did. Hats off to the team at Unit 42. For the average bear, the average detector out there, I think this one really introduces like just a different way that adversaries can make their campaigns more complex. Right. 13 malware families being tied towards this, multiple campaigns. I mean, we're getting to a point where it's like, did we uncover like a single threat actor again, who's like kind of leasing out this domain space, or did like all of this activity just have so many similar qualities that it looks and feels like it's related? But in fact, it's just kind of like the same old thing, wash, rinse, and repeat.
Just the evolution of techniques.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where I'm at with like wanting to understand more, maybe some of the adversarial intent here. We might never get the answer to that question, obviously, but it's crazy when you think about just the sheer volume of numbers here, right? A particular campaign that utilized 6,000 newly registered domain. The analysis that they did on those 6,000 stemmed, or I should say, tied to like a larger subset, I believe. I read somewhere in the article that, there was creation dates of 444, almost 445,000 domains belonging to the same threat actor, stemming all the way back to 2023. I mean, just sheer numbers and sheer magnitude, like really unveil and kind of make you want to ask, like, what is the actual overall goal here? Is it just sheer domain registering and just taking advantage of that? Or is there like a larger C2 at play?
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's a side benefit of being able to sell those domains at some point because they're worth something.
It might be the other side of it. You never know. You never know what someone's going to build. Right?
We'll use this for our C2 right now, but maybe later somebody wants to start a company with this name. And
I'm not going to say in this day and age with all the different ways we're spelling things, it's certainly possible. And you never know what might end up being a company's name.
All right. So next up, I feel like this one should be our bingo card with companies like Fortinet. Researchers have observed threat actors deploying malware into the must-use plugins or MU plugins directory in WordPress environments. This technique gives attackers a stealthy and persistent foothold as MU plugins are automatically loaded by WordPress and are not visible in the admin panel under the standard plugin management interface. The malware allows for code execution and unauthorized administrative control without being easily detectable by site operators. The attacks were detailed in a report by WP Scan, which noted that the malicious MU plugins were often dropped following successful exploitation of another vulnerability in the environment, typically through insecure plugins or outdated WordPress core files. Once access is gained, the attackers upload PHP-based payloads into the wcontent/MU plugins directory. These payloads are crafted to silently execute and include functionality such as backdoors, command execution, and admin count creation. So these ones always make me nervous because I know there's like a ton of folks out there who have like the DreamHost accounts and like, they've the one-click WordPress installs and they set up their blog and then they never look at it again. And those things are all just part of somebody's, botnet kind of thing.
Chris, I did a little bit of statistic hunting before the episode, and there is a 2025 figure, so at most it's 4 months old, that 43.5% of all websites utilize WordPress. So Around 513 million websites are built using this. So for anyone who's like, how bad can it really be, right? I see another statistic I'm looking at. It says more than 800 million websites are built using WordPress. I mean, for anyone who's curious about just like how bad can it be and stuff like that. Now, we're not saying that the sky is falling whatsoever. I think what Chris mentioned is kind of like first off, the ubiquity of WordPress, one, and then two, the number of instances that go unpatched, unknown. People just don't understand what's going on behind the hood. And then couple that with you've got an adversary who's figured out a relatively advanced way of maintaining persistence, but also achieving execution. That must use plugins directory, that moo plugins directory. It's a safe haven. It's a safe haven for code and malicious activity and stuff like that. And I also, I'm not giving the threat actors compliments, Chris, but I do appreciate kind of the article pointing out the lateral movement, if you will, or the daisy chaining of vulnerabilities in here. It was an original, like, externally facing vulnerability that allowed them to gain enough access to then upload a malicious file into moo plugins, and that then would result in less detection. Furthermore, it would always load, right? It's kind of like a safe directory, if you will, that the WordPress instances would use. But nonetheless, an interesting takeaway here. I know you've got some more information about how they maintain persistence, but I read this one and I was like, wow, this could be a pretty huge threat vector for certain sites out there. And depending on what threat actor intentions are, setting up like drive-by compromises, watering holes and stuff like that, this might actually end up being a useful vulnerability for folks. So if you're a WordPress operator or you have a website that uses it, you know what I'm going to say already, Chris. You know what I'm going to say.
All right, so to maintain persistence, some of the malware samples observed would even check whether the malicious plugin was removed and then reinsert it automatically. Others included file cleanup routines to remove indicators of compromise. WP Scan also pointed out that in several cases, threat actors modified core WordPress files or installed additional web shells elsewhere in the file system to reestablish access. Administrators are advised to routinely audit the moo plugins directory, which is not commonly used by most site owners and therefore should be empty in many legitimate setups. Any unexpected files in that directory should be treated as suspicious. The report recommends hardening WordPress environments by keeping all components updated, limiting file write permissions where possible, and implementing server-level malware scanning to catch these types of threats, which can bypass typical plugin visibility and detection. So you mentioned like 800 million websites, which is crazy high number of machines that can be exploited. And I think that WordPress is probably subject to so many vulnerabilities, in part because, like Fortinet, it's publicly facing and easy to find on the internet. So a big target.
I like how you're not letting the Fortinet comparison go, because it feels very appropriate where we talk about this quite a lot. No, I think this is one of those. I think you called it out. This is usually, these are perimeter facing systems or perimeter facing CMSs and stuff like that. I mean, it's definitely something to watch out for, just because it can become a really big threat entry vector for organizations out there, right? The other thing too, Chris, is and this one you might never see. Sometimes compromised websites never actually get caught until they're part of a larger incident or something else happens. I speak from personal experience. A number of times where you would see a threat actor originate from, do a thing to, or C2 back to some sort of compromised WordPress instance. And I'm not throwing shade at WordPress. I'm just saying there's so many out there that it's nothing for a threat actor to say, oh, okay, here's my list of 5,000 out of 800 million. Here's my list of 5,000 vulnerable instances. Auto deploy my C2, auto deploy, rotate through C2 domains. And next thing you know, you've got an entire infrastructure of WordPress bots doing stuff that no one was ready for. And quite frankly, are probably like dead or unused or unmonitored sites. No one's really going to notice until you build out that intel that says, hey, here's something to go look after. And then of course you're stuck in the water because, like, oh, that's a hosting company and it's a vulnerable WordPress instance. It doesn't actually lead you to the attacker, just leads you to more files of theirs. And it's not always what we're looking for.
I thought you were going to say next thing you know, you're mining cryptocurrency and...
No. That's only super advanced perimeter network device exploits. WordPress is too basic for that.
Yeah. All right. Next up, Google has released a security update for Chrome to address a high-severity zero-day vulnerability that was actively exploited in the wild as part of an espionage campaign. The flaw is tracked as CVE-2024-2886 and is described as a use after free issue in the web codecs component. Google confirmed that it is aware of reports that an exploit for this vulnerability exists in the wild, but has not yet released technical details about the attack. The issue affects Chrome versions prior to 123.0.6312.86 on Windows and Mac OS, and 123.0.6312.105 on Linux. These versions contain the fix and have already started rolling out via the stable channel. The vulnerability allows an attacker to exploit memory corruption in web codecs, which could lead to arbitrary code execution in the context of the browser, a common pathway for both remote code execution and sandbox escape when chained with other bugs. So Chrome, I think, is probably the most popular browser on the internet. So again, a very wide vulnerability out there being exploited.
That's kind of another thing that speaks towards like the ubiquity of this browser, right? To be fair, even though let's just be clear and say, even though this thing is active in the wild, it doesn't mean everyone out there is going to get hit and is vulnerable and stuff like that. Number one, but I think it's also worth calling out, Chris, that there are obviously Chrome OS based operating systems, or Chrome OS based systems, I should say. And then of course there's threat actors who recognize Chrome's popularity throughout the world, and they just kind of sit and wait, a lot of times. And to be very fair, a lot of times when we learn about Chrome 0 days and stuff, they're very advanced, complex setup, Chris. I don't think we've ever learned about a Chrome vulnerability where it's like, oh, if you jiggle these 3 menu bars at the same time, something happens, right? It's always like a very carefully crafted exploit plus a very carefully crafted set of situations plus a very carefully crafted this, right? An incorrect handle provided in unspecified circumstances in Mojo on Windows. I mean, this is not like every Chrome in the world is vulnerable, right? And usually when we say this type of stuff is exploited in the wild, at least in the experience that we've talked about Chrome 0 days and stuff, it is not some super crazy wide, everyone who visits, google.com is going to get hit.
Usually very targeted.
It's usually very targeted a lot of times. And in fact, the article even quotes and says that this is being exploited in phishing attacks as part of a cyber espionage campaign targeting Russian organizations dubbed Operation Forum Troll, as it's been called. And I'm just quoting here, but it's an important thing to note for everyone that it doesn't mean that there's a huge Chrome issue. Obviously, patch the best that you can. But a lot of times when we read about these, the best recourse is first off patching, number one. But from a threat modeling or threat analysis perspective, is everyone in the world vulnerable or a victim here? No, it's very, very, very unique that this happens.
And somebody told me recently, I don't know if this is true or not, but they said that next to iOS 0 days, Chrome 0 days are second most valuable on the black market. So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've actually read that or heard that as well. And I think it again just speaks to if you can get someone to visit a malicious site and enter in particular information, account takeover and credential theft and stuff like that, that's one notion. But if you can craft a vulnerability that just requires someone to just open their web browser and go to a link and not do anything else, that's obviously much more valuable. Because all they had to do was open the browser. You didn't need any more user activity. And I think that's usually, Chris, especially given the way these vulnerabilities are described, the way the exploit requests are described, the less user interaction you can have, the more the vulnerability is going to be, because it's more of a guaranteed, I don't need to trick the user to do a thing. Right. And if you can find browser-based exploits with minimal user interaction, you got a pretty hot target on your hand. It's not very difficult to then say, all right, I'm going to weaponize this, deploy it in a spearfish, and I might only target 5 people in the world with it, but if I can get the 5 that are part of my campaign, boom, we're in. And I didn't need to convince them to click anything other than maybe a link or one step from a spearfish as opposed to 5 to 10 steps.
Right. So while Google has not publicly linked the exploitation to a specific threat actor, security researchers have indicated that the flaw was used in targeted attacks with clear espionage objectives. Based on past campaigns, it's likely the exploit was delivered via malicious web pages or embedded iframes, making it suitable for highly targeted watering hole or spear phishing operations. Google's security bulletin advises users to update their browsers immediately and restart them to ensure the patch is applied. Given that this is the second Chrome zero-day exploited in 2024, the frequency of in-the-wild exploitation is a reminder that browsers remain a high-value target, especially for nation-state-aligned actors. Enterprises are also advised to verify that fleet management policies enforce timely browser patching across user endpoints. And with that, Matt, I'm going to say it for you. Patch, patch, patch.
Patch all the things. Patch all the things. You never know. But yeah, patch. I'll offer one final piece for defenders out there. Chris, I know we have quite a few who listen to this podcast here. If you're like, oh, what types of detections can I write or anything like that? Just encourage your users to patch. Encourage your users to update Chrome. Literally, it just like is a click of a button. They do it, and it restores all your tabs for you. You barely skip a beat. Make this part of normal user activity. Anytime you see that notice come up, and I've seen this actually before. Chris, I almost want to mine the internet for it, but you see in webinars a lot of times, in webcasts and stuff, when people are sharing their web browser, you can see, I'm not really paying attention to like the icons and stuff there, but you can see that oval that says Google Chrome needs to be updated or an update is available or something. And I know there are certain extensions that will not work until the update is applied just because they don't want to be a victim of that. So like, update and patch with Chrome. It's seamless. It's almost effortless. And I would argue you could like, I'm going to go make a coffee. Update. By the time you come back, everything's restored. Right? They've made it very easy and very simple. It's not like let me spend a few hours letting my system update. It's like literally just clicking and you're good.
And speaking of Chrome security, I'm going to give a shout out to our friend John Tuckner and tell everybody to go check out Secure Annex, which is security for Chrome browsers and malicious extensions. Really cool project. So definitely go check that out if this is something you're thinking about.
John doing all the amazing good work out there. If you are someone who is dealing with malicious Chrome extensions or wants to wrap monitoring around them or threat intel around them, go check out what John's doing. This is a friendly shout out from Chris and I for John Tuckner over at Secure Annex.
Yeah, I'm supposed to send him some smoked salmon. I promised him for a little favor he did for me a while ago. So this is the interest payment on that, John. Salmon's in the mail. Don't worry.
I don't know. That might be the most Pacific Northwestern comment I've heard on this podcast in a long time. I owe someone some smoked salmon.
You make friends that way. Let me tell you.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just curious as to why John's the only one in this conversation getting it. But we'll leave that off.
Okay, well, maybe I'll put Matt on my salmon list. All right.
I've got the right background for it.
There you go. Researchers have identified a new Lazarus group campaign that uses malicious versions of a legitimate tool called ClickFix to distribute malware as part of a wider trend of piggybacking on popular or trusted software in what analysts are referring to as bandwagon attacks. The activity is linked to Lazarus, a North Korean APT group known for its persistent targeting of enterprise and critical infrastructure sectors. In this case, the attackers weaponized a legitimate binary, ClickFix, a tool used for automated web interaction testing, by inserting a malicious payload that downloads and runs a second-stage malware. The malicious payload is compiled into a Trojanized version of the ClickFix installer, which delivers a Cobalt Strike beacon upon execution. This technique is consistent with prior Lazarus tactics, including the use of signed or legitimate-looking binaries to bypass endpoint detection. Once installed, the beacon connects to attacker-controlled infrastructure and allows remote control of the infected machine, enabling further post-exploitation activity. I'm always shocked when I see Cobalt Strike. Have we not solved that problem?
No, not at all. It's still wildly successful as a threat actor tool, despite the fact that you allegedly have to email the parent company to get a license in order for it to work. Apparently, you can get a cracked version and it works just fine. Or threat actors have figured out a way to say, we are a legitimate security research company. We would like our own copy. I don't know. I'm just going to tie it back and say this seems to be pretty typical activity of Lazarus doing what they do. No compliment to that team whatsoever. But, if I was rolling in the successes of more than $1 billion in cryptocurrency theft, I might also start to think about the next way to do the thing or the next way to gain a foothold and taking advantage of ClickFix software. This particular campaign, dubbed Fake Interview, which I find interesting here, is again tied with the kind of advanced social engineering techniques, typical stuff we're seeing come out of the Lazarus group. And I would just say, North Korean threat actors in general and whatnot. Social media luring, leading towards kind of downloading and installing this type of software, leading towards remote access and things like that. Obviously, because we are dealing with kind of a software update based tool, the phishing lures and stuff usually result around, hey, you need to apply this patch, you need to do that. So when Chris and I say patch, 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 everyone, we don't mean fall victim to an email or a fish that says patch, patch, patch. This is about going through the proper mechanisms in order to update. And that's really one of, I think, the biggest ways to get around this is if you are in an enterprise environment, right, you likely have some sort of a patching capability or regimen or schedule or whatever in place. Follow that. If you get an out of band email telling you that your Chrome is outdated, similar to what we just described, that's not how you patch Chrome. You don't patch Chrome by downloading something new that you've never heard of before. So user education is going to be a big one. But then, Chris, again, we're dealing with another like novel new entry vector followed by the same old stuff, right? So it's like once Lazarus gets in, they're like, here's the same old Cobalt Strike beacon we've always used and the other techniques that everyone knows us for. So from a detection perspective, super easy to catch them once they're in. But if we wanted to get them a little bit earlier on, take a look at the blog post from the folks over at Sequoia. There's some good IOCs inside of there too.
All right, so this campaign fits into a broader Lazarus strategy of exploiting public trust and legitimate software to distribute malware in targeted environments. The group has previously done this with other software like PuTTY and VNC, typically targeting organizations involved in software development, defense, and finance. In this case, the use of ClickFix shows an evolution in their software supply chain targeting, focusing on smaller or more niche tools that may not be closely monitored. The report recommends that organizations implement stricter controls around software sourcing and validation, especially for lesser-known tools. Monitoring for unexpected outbound C2 connections and behavioral anomalies during software installations is also advised. As with past Lazarus operations, the targeting appears to be highly selective, which suggests a focus on espionage rather than broad financial gain. So yeah, the North Koreans sure like to make money.
I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways actually is, kind of seeing the move towards espionage and stuff like that. I would argue and say it's all probably in the name of future potential advanced crypto gains. But doesn't mean Lazarus can't be repurposed for other things. I know we've talked at length before, Chris, when you got a threat actor who's good at a thing, if you can sell those services or repurpose them into some sort of national objective or national security objective, why not? Never know.
Yeah.
Might make the supreme leader happy.
That fits nicely with this next one about selling services from North Korea. They've been embedding over 1,000 IT workers into full-time jobs at foreign companies, allowing them to blend in with software development teams and operate undetected for extended periods. According to a joint advisory issued by the United States, South Korea, and Japan, these workers are not performing one-off freelance projects. They are securing long-term employment and integrating into core engineering and DevOps functions. The advisory describes this as a shift in tactics, where previously these operatives may have worked as gig-based freelancers. They are now establishing deeper and more sustained access within organizations. These workers often pose as nationals from China, Japan, South Korea, the US, or other countries, using stolen or borrowed identities to pass hiring processes. They target tech companies of all sizes, frequently using online freelancing platforms and job boards to gain access. The advisory highlights that the majority of the income earned is funneled back to the North Korean regime, helping fund military programs, including weapons development. Notably, their work is typically non-malicious in nature, focused on routine software development, QA, or mobile app engineering, but they sometimes attempt to gather internal documentation, credentials, and code repositories for potential future use. In some cases, they've accessed proprietary developer tools and information on deployment pipelines. So this is such an interesting thing, I know at LimaCharlie, we've had at least one confirmed North Korean threat actor show up for a job interview. But it's like, yeah, it's wild because they're actually earning the income in that sort of the base. And if they can get the access, it's like a secondary win,
I think this is one of the wildest campaigns that we will ever read about or learn about. I mean, from a social engineering perspective. I mean, number one, I'm going to disagree a little bit with the language that was used there. So I kind of feel like when we first learned about this, it was, Chris, as you mentioned, kind of like gig-based economy, like people are trying to get hired for little things or whatnot. And someone's like, there's a shift in tactics. They've actually been here longer. I would argue that the gig economy was the shift in tactics because this is a longer tail set up an introduction for it, or we just say that this threat actor is interested in placing themselves in jobs regardless of length of jobs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm always
it gives a
hesitant.
much easier way to test. Like, can we
It
put these
is.
guys in there? Can we, go undetected and make it work?
But then to hear like, oh, they've actually been in there much longer, and it's not always just like the typical types of places of employment you expect to see. It's actually all sorts of different industries and everything like that. Part of me, like, all jokes aside, Chris, part of me wonders if they just want jobs just so
It was.
bad that they're willing to just like fake it in. Number one,
In well-paying jobs, like a high-level software development job in the States,
yeah.
you're probably getting close to 200,000 USD, right?
Not only that, but in the article, they talk about how these employees end up being the star employees, contributing more than their legitimate counterparts. And
Yeah.
I kind of I wonder if you get to a point where it's a little bit of like employment Stockholm syndrome, where you wake up and like, all right, what do you got for us today? And you're like, I just want to do good work.
Yeah.
Like I don't,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's one of these people who kind of pushes off the theft part of it and is like, oh yeah, they haven't given me access yet. In the meantime, he's like, I'm learning so much about JavaScript. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
So the real question is, like, where can I go hire these guys and just keep them isolated from important information?
Yeah, exactly. Like, just put ACLs in place, zero trust policies, and then be like, I'm going to hire a bunch of subcontractors. Two things come out of that, Chris. The first is like, I wonder if that essentially counts though as like declarable like sanction payments. If you
Well, if you don't know, right,
OFAC.
there's like what's it, plausible deniability.
Yeah, exactly. Like we sought out a bunch of North Korean developers, and they ended up being amazing. And then we went to market with this, and we fired our original dev team, but we got to market with this amazing thing, right? It's kind of like at the bottom is like like GitHub has like "Made with Love" by GitHub or whatever. The other thing, Chris, I think is the wildest one out of this is, typically we talk about like threat actor gain, monetary benefits, and stuff like that. The other reason I think this is one of the wildest campaigns we'll ever hear about in our careers in cybersecurity. First off, the salaries are funneled back up to the regime, number one. Number two, we've joked about this before, but there's a comedic sketch here in the States. There's a show here in the US where they talk about the best way to rob a bank. And they're like, all right, first thing we're going to do, we're going to go to the bank. We're going to get jobs. We're going to get them to trust us. And then we're going to get access to the keys. And then we're going to get promoted. And then they're going to trust. And then like 30 years from now, we're going to walk out with the money, And I feel like this is a really interesting like approach because, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, someone somewhere was like, all right, I got the perfect plan of attack. We're going to go apply for jobs. Oh, and then we're going to steal. Nope. We're going to work there for like a week. Nope. Years. Okay. What are we going to do while we're there? The actual work. Oh, okay. Do I get paid for that? No. But hold on. Where's the money going? Don't ask, don't tell. Don't worry about it. Just, you're going to do everything like a job except for the getting paid part. That's the part you're not going to do. And then it's like, how do you then take, and I'm going to use just sample SaaS-based software here. How do you then tell that employee, don't log into your Workday account so you can't see what the paycheck looks like? Because if you're a high-paid software developer at a US-based company, whether you're foreign or not, your salary is still not bad. You convert that to your local currency, and you're like, wait a second, I'm actually worth a lot more than I'm getting paid here, And I wonder how mentally, and there's a little bit of brainwashing, I'm sure, propaganda and everything like that, but I'm wondering how mentally you get an army of people to essentially go do all the work of a full-time employment job, do it well, but then ignore the benefits of it all. And obviously, I'm putting the I know what the benefit is part aside. Like, I understand it's in support of the regime and stuff like that, but it's just it's a crazy effort. And for anyone who's looking for like what's Matt's counterpoint here, the other side of this is like, I'm going to take a team of technically capable people, train them to be hackers, put them into a state nexus offensive security group, and they're hackers. I'm going to pay them as hackers, so they're doing the work that they love to do. They're doing that malicious, invasive style stuff, and they're doing it in the name of national security. These folks are literally voluntarily writing supreme JavaScript code to support someone else's front end in the name of regime support. And it's just such a wild, like, mental hula hoop, I think, to wrap around. It's crazy to read about every time we read about it. And Chris, I'll finish up with this one last thought. I think it's one thing when all of your targets are like companies that have, a lot of IP or something that they want to steal or something like that. Like, oh, we want to get blueprints, so everyone go apply to work at this blueprint thing, and then shove your way over to the file shares so you can find the data of interest or something like that, right? You can kind of see the wheels turning as it goes. This is literally like, go get a job in web development and support the regime with finance, and that's literally it. And it's like, you almost wonder, why don't you just create a legitimate path for these people to work, and then you can kind of alleviate some financial stress that way.
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier. It's the sanctions. It's almost just a way to get around the sanctions, right?
Right, but it's just so weird to me, where it's like, it's like, okay, we're gonna get around the sanctions. What are we gonna do? Smuggle, import, steal? No, we're gonna go get jobs. And it's just like, it's just odd, because it's such a legitimate thing, but it's all done underneath this veil of international sanctioned geopolitical stuff, and it's bizarre, right? It's bizarre. Now, the one thing I'll equate this to, the reason maybe why it's not so surprising to a lot of folks, is this is like typical implant behavior from during the Cold War days. We're going to send a family over to Russia, or we're going to send Russians are going to send a family over to the United States, and they're going to go and work and start a family and buy a house and do all this kind of stuff. We may activate them in 20 years, right? But it's such that long tail goal. I mean, Chris, what happens if these people get promoted?
Or elected president?
Yeah. I mean, just what happens one day if, the individual who was designed to be the implant in the web development part is now the CTO at one of these companies? I mean, what happens then? Like, you go public and then the stock crashes because you find out it's been a spy this whole entire time? Who knows? It's a wild case, and I'll get off this tangent, but it's so wild to read about for me, because I just can't get around the mental side of it, of like, go get a full-time job and give me all your salary. Like, it's digital pimping.
So the U.S. government estimates that North Korea is generating at least $3 billion annually from malicious cyber activity and illicit IT work. I heard it high-quality IT work, but I digress. With a significant portion attributed to these embedded workers, the advisory includes a range of technical indicators to help companies identify and respond to these threats, such as usage of multiple logins from geographically distant locations, activity that aligns with DPRK business hours, and a tendency to avoid direct communication, for example, no Zoom calls or phone interviews. They frequently use VPNs and spoofed IP addresses to conceal their locations, and will often share devices or credentials across multiple accounts. Government officials are urging companies to tighten remote hiring practices, verify identities more rigorously during onboarding, and restrict access to sensitive infrastructure until new employees are vetted over time. They also recommend monitoring for behavioral patterns consistent with state-affiliated actors, particularly in cases where employees appear overly cautious about voice or video interactions. The sustained nature of this tactic makes it more difficult to detect and could expose companies to long-term risks, including intellectual property theft, data exfiltration, or indirect involvement in sanctions violations. So there we have it. Be careful who you hire. I've seen people online using the hold a hand up in front of your face technique for the video interviews. I guess the AI spoof doesn't like that.
So actually, funny enough, a huge hat tip here at the AI Summit to Sunil Yu, who yesterday ran a workshop in creating deepfakes and talked about the different countermeasures. And if you've got someone who's utilizing a deepfake trained model, because that is quite frankly how they're interviewing, there's things you can do to hopefully like get around the superimposition or the deep faking. And it does involve like, interfering with the camera, trying to interfere with that, bringing other people in, making a lot of noise, background noise and stuff like that, and seeing if you can throw some of the cloaking off, if you will. But, if you're someone who's doing these types of video interviews and you're concerned about this, or you think this may have been the case, read up on this stuff. There's a lot of countermeasures in place that can be done. And I'll be honest and tell everyone, HR is not leading the charge in shutting this down, right? So, and what I'm trying to say there, everyone, is it may fall on security, and again, understanding the use of AI in these campaigns and saying like, okay, here's the things to look out for, and educating those users and educating those departments, as opposed to how did you hire this person, right? So I think there's going to be a little bit more involved work from the security teams here to get to get around this and implement mitigation measures in place.
I wonder how long it's going to be before we can't tell whether or not we're talking to an AI on a video call or not. I'd say 5 years max, probably closer to 3.
I think we're a lot closer than anybody thinks.
Yeah.
And I mean, Chris, I think measuring it in years might be too long. I don't think years is required, because it's
is it too early for a drink?
And
I get stressed out when I hear about
it shouldn't scare anybody, right? We knew the technology was going to go this way. There's pros and cons to all of this, of course, but it's scary what some of the capabilities are out there. I'm just gonna pause there and say, for anyone who's like trying to wrap their head around all the dangers and risks that AI can pose, there's so much more reading and stuff to dig into, but it's going to be a huge benefit for threat actors. But the same is true for defenders, right? We need to stop looking at technology, and I won't rant on this too much, I promise, but we need to stop looking at technology as, oh, the bad guys can use it, we can't use it. What are you talking about? We can use it too, right?
Yeah.
Defenders get to take advantage of the same stuff. I mean, a bad guy who goes and creates an account at a Caption AI or something like that. I'm not saying as a defender you go do the same thing, but go utilize AI-based or blue team technologies with AI and enhancing them. Like, utilize them and find the wins in that, right? Don't just throw your hands up and say, oh, the bad guys are more advanced, therefore there's nothing we can do. And it's kind of like bad guys can only buy Ferraris and we can only buy bicycles. And everyone's like, oh, well, there's no way to stop them, so just let them drive around. It's like, throw a roadblock in there, right? Put a speed bump in the road. You never know.
All right, Matt. This was a fun one. I love it. Ranting Matt is probably one of my favorite things about this podcast. So I'm glad we got you going on that last one.
I just can't imagine, like, you grow up, you go serve your time in the military, and you're like, what am I going to do in the military? Am I going to fire nukes? Am I going to go training? Am I going to develop weapons? Blah, blah. It's like, no, you're going to go write code.
CSS
for a company.
Here you go.
Yeah. Could you imagine, Chris, like how bad it could be if one of them is like just the absolute like pit of language of programming languages, or just one of the worst jobs of like, your whole job is to clean up defunct CSS libraries. It'd just be like, cool. Please.
All right. On that dystopian Black Mirror-esque thought, I'll sign off today. Thanks again, Matt.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Good seeing you.
Yeah, bye.